Have you ever met a real-life Karen? There are people who believe they have the right to do anything, regardless of right or wrong. They think that the rules only apply to others, and they are privileged to stand above everyone. But what happens when they mess with the wrong person? And this time, no one can save them from the consequences. Today's story is a clear proof. No one can abuse their arrogance forever. But don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on crazy HOA stories. Now, please follow along. The 12-hour shift finally ended, leaving me feeling exhausted and a little relieved. Today had been a rough day, a tense land dispute that almost turned into a fight, an illegal car chase on the highway, and a bunch of other small issues that a police chief like me couldn't ignore. All of it had drained my energy, and at the moment, all I wanted to do was find a quiet place to relax, sip a cup of hot black coffee, and clear my mind. Rosewood Coffee is located on a corner in the center of town. It is not a luxurious or flashy place, but its simplicity and cozy space have kept me here for many years. I drove my black Ford Explorer slowly down the familiar brick road, then parked right in front of the shop. Carefully shifting the gear lever to pee, I leaned my head back on the seat, took a deep breath before opening the door and stepping out. The afternoon air was cool, the sun gradually leaning to the west, dyeing the ancient buildings a warm, pale yellow. I locked my bike with a familiar motion, listened to the beep, and stepped onto the sidewalk. Even though I was used to this small town, I still unconsciously scanned my surroundings out of habit. Everything seemed peaceful. An elderly couple was walking their dog, a few young people were chatting by their bicycles, and maple leaves were scattered on the pavement in a light breeze. The door of the cafe opened. The aroma of roasted coffee wafted in, mixed with the sweetness of freshly baked waffles. I walked in, familiar enough that I didn't need to look to know who was there today. At the bar, Mike, the white-haired owner, was busy wiping cups, while Lena, the young waitress, cleared tables while swaying to the soft jazz music playing from the speakers in the corner of the cafe. The atmosphere was so pleasant that I almost forgot the stress of the workday. I chose a table near the window where I could see the street and sat down. From this position, I could clearly see my car parked neatly on the white line, not obstructing anyone. Completely legal. A habit that had been ingrained in me wherever I was. I always made sure that everything was in compliance with the law, even with my car. I relaxed, unbuttoned the top button of my police shirt, and signaled for a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no milk. Lena quickly brought a steaming cup of coffee, placing it in front of me with a polite smile. I nodded in thanks, then picked up the cup, feeling the heat spread through the porcelain. Taking the first sip, the rich bitterness flowed down my throat, awakening all my senses. At this moment, I just wanted to enjoy the silence, putting aside all thoughts of past troubles. But life as a police officer has never been so simple. Before I could finish half of my cup, I heard a loud bang, followed by screams from the street. I quickly put down my cup of coffee, and a feeling of unease rose in my heart. People were whispering and looking out the window, and I quickly walked outside. My heart clenched at the unbelievable scene before me. My car, the windows shattered, the body of the car twisted as if it had just suffered the wrath of a demon. In front of it, a woman with curly blonde hair, her face full of anger, her hand tightly gripping a metal stick. I unconsciously clenched my fist. HOA Karen was a name that was familiar to the town, but no one wanted to get involved. A middle-aged woman who was self-centered, controlling, and who saw rules as serving only herself. The police had received many complaints about her, ranging from petty arguments with neighbors to serious acts like threatening store clerks. But today, she didn't just cause trouble, she smashed my car. She stood there, hands on her hips, the metal bat thrown to the ground as proof of her guilt, but her eyes were still defiant. She didn't show any remorse. On the contrary, her expression was triumphant, as if she had just carried out a just punishment on someone. A few passers-by stopped to watch, some whispering, others standing still as if not wanting to miss anything. Karen glanced quickly at the crowd, then back at the car, grimacing with frustration as if she were the victim in this whole thing. She stomped her feet on the pavement, her arms flailing in a showy manner. Then she began to raise her voice. I couldn't make out what she was saying right then, but her high-pitched voice echoed down the street, swirling around like an annoying soundtrack. Phrases like, "blocking the way," "taking up space," "this damn car," kept coming, the shrill voice piercing the air. She glared at the car, as if it had seriously violated her authority just by existing. The excuse she was making was completely absurd. I knew for a fact that this was not a private parking lot. I had parked legally right inside the painted lines. There were no signs that I could not park there. But to HOA Karen, legality was less important than her feelings. If she was unhappy, then the world had to adjust to her will, and if something got in her way, even if it was just a legally parked car, she was willing to use violence to solve the problem. I glanced down at the metal stick lying on the ground, the tip of which was partially dented from the force of the blow. She had hit my car with all her anger, and now, after it was all over, she was standing there, still not admitting her mistake, but loudly complaining as if she had been the one who had been wronged. A cold wave of anger rose within me. I had dealt with many vandals, many troublemakers, but none as brazen as HOA Karen. I felt my heart beat slow, every nerve in my head tense like a broken string. She still didn't know who I was. She was still acting aggressive, still thinking she could manipulate the whole situation with her usual domineering manner. But she had the wrong person. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm but colder than tonight. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to get angry, because my silence was enough to make the atmosphere tense. I took my sheriff's badge from my coat pocket, held it in my hand, and took a step toward her. She continued, but then she stopped. Her eyes fell on the badge in my hand. I looked straight at her, and that was the moment HOA Karen realized she had just made a huge mistake. She didn't need any more evidence. The scene before me said it all. My car had been smashed, not by a momentary anger, but by a purposeful, relentless, unbridled rage. HOA Karen didn't just hit once and stop. She did it with all her determination, as if she was pouring all her hatred onto each piece of lifeless metal. The metal bat, her weapon, still lay on the pavement, one end dented. Deep dents had been left on the side of my car in several places. From a direct hit to the door, another to the hood, the right side mirror had been torn almost off its hinges. None of this had been the result of a momentary rage, but deliberate destruction. I pictured what had happened just a few minutes earlier when I had been sitting inside the cafe, completely unaware that outside my car was the target of a rampage. She must have come forward in a rage, her hand clutching the cold bat, her eyes glaring as if someone had offended her entire pride. She didn't care who was watching, didn't care that there might be witnesses, didn't care about the consequences. In that moment, her entire world was reduced to this car and her blind rage. A few passers-by stood still, a few whispered to each other, but no one dared to step forward to intervene. Those who knew HOA Karen knew she wasn't an easy person to talk to, and that anyone who interfered at this point could be her next victim. Perhaps in her mind this action was entirely justified. Perhaps she believed that this car was parked in the wrong place, even though it wasn't, that it had offended her in some way, and therefore she had the right to punish it in this way. But the truth never worked according to HOA Karen's personal rules. And now, when it was all over, when her anger had been released in every dent in the car's body, she still didn't see her mistake. She stood there, hands on hips, satisfied with what she had done. But that moment was over. Because I wasn't just some ordinary driver whose car had been smashed and he couldn't do anything about it. Because she had just destroyed the sheriff's car. I clenched my badge in my hand, a chill running down my spine. My anger didn't explode the way she had unleashed it on the car. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it spread, slowly and surely, like a storm building in the sky before it engulfed everything. My feet thumped against the tile as I left the bar, a reflex as the tension and alertness began to take over my body. I didn't need anyone to tell me what was happening. I saw it all. My Ford Explorer lay there, broken. The windows were shattered, glass glinting under the streetlights. The hood was dented, the side mirrors dangling, the bodywork covered in dents, as if it had been through some kind of torture. It was more of a battlefield than a car. And in the midst of the devastation, standing tall, was HOA Karen. She stood straight, her face arrogant as if she were the victim. Her hands still bore the marks of her actions. Her breathing was rapid, but not from fear, but from the excitement of having carried out her own justice. There was no remorse in her eyes. At her feet, the metal stick was deformed. Her weapon was clear evidence of deliberate sabotage. Everything happened in a few short seconds, but time seemed to stretch on forever. A heavy silence enveloped the atmosphere. All around, passers-by gathered, their eyes filled with curiosity, surprise, mixed with a bit of malicious interest of those who witnessed a tragedy unfolding but did not want to interfere. No one dared to step forward to intervene. No one said anything, because they all knew this was not a simple conflict. This was Flower Karen, the one no one wanted to cross when she was angry. I stood there, my fists clenched, taking deep breaths to calm myself, but I wasn't angry in the usual way, not shouting, not exploding, just a chill running down my spine, a slow but steady anger that seeped into every muscle, every vein. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to say anything. I just looked straight at her. Karen began to realize something was wrong, too. She blinked as if pulled out of an excited trance. Her eyes darted quickly over the crowd, then stopped on me, recognizing me as the owner of the car she had just mercilessly destroyed. She looked surprised, just for a moment. But then, as if the self-preservation instinct of someone who always wants to control the situation kicked in, she put her hands on her hips, her lips pressed together in an effort to maintain her position. A glare, an expression of indifference, not a trace of remorse. She wasn't afraid, not because she didn't understand what was about to happen. It was because she didn't know who I was. The people in the crowd did. I could see them exchanging silent glances, some shaking their heads, some holding their breaths, waiting to see what would happen next. A man standing nearby pulled out his phone, not sure if it was to call the police or to film. I didn't take my eyes off HOA Karen, and she didn't lower her head. We stood there, facing each other, only a parking lot full of broken glass between us, but the tension in the air could be felt from dozens of meters away. This was no longer a petty argument. This was a confrontation, and HOA Karen had no idea that she had messed with the wrong person. She raised her eyebrows, pursed her lips in contempt, as if I were just a bystander prying into something that had nothing to do with her. I was used to people like this, people who believed that the world had to operate according to their rules and that anyone who got in their way was to be despised. Not only did she not recognize who I was, but she seemed convinced that she had every right to destroy that car. She folded her arms across her chest, her head tilted back in the manner of someone more accustomed to giving orders than being questioned, Everything about her screamed domineering, from the way she emphasized each movement to the defiant smirk. She didn't care about the wrecked car, she didn't care about the onlookers, and especially she didn't care about me, because to her I was just someone, not the sheriff, not a law enforcement officer, just some stupid driver who had parked where she didn't like it. She jerked her chin, her voice rising with an unwarranted confidence. Her words carried the stifled anger of someone who believed she had been wronged. Her reason? She believed that my car was parked in the wrong place. She said it as if it were an absolute fact, as if the rules were a minor detail that should not be taken into account. She believed that this parking space belonged to her, that she had absolute authority over it, and that anyone who dared to trespass should be punished with violence, with the metal rod she had just used to smash my car. There was no hesitation in her words, no hint of remorse, because in her eyes she had done nothing wrong. She believed she was serving justice, and the scariest thing? She did not actually realize her mistake. Karen had been the terror of many in town. She was no mindless thug, but the kind of person who knew how to bend the law. Neighbor quarrels, supermarket disturbances, even complaints about threatening a waitress. She always got away with using her tenacity and shady connections. The law? To her it was just a game she could bend. My eyes swept over the wrecked car, then back to HOA Karen, studying every line on her face. She wasn't faking it. She truly believed her actions were justified. The anger inside me did not burst forth, did not roar like a fire, but crept slowly but surely like lava. I had seen many criminals, thieves, conmen, even murderers, but few could destroy another person's property with such confidence and without remorse. She really did not believe she was wrong. Around, the onlookers began to whisper, some exchanging worried glances. Some seemed to know who I was, but they did not say anything. Maybe they wanted to see how far Karen would go before she realized she had made an irreparable mistake. But Karen continued to spew judgments. She spoke as if she were standing on a courtroom or a pulpit declaring her rights, with her chin up, her eyes challenging, her voice sharp. She cared not who was listening or the fact that she had just vandalized someone else's property. She was only concerned with defending her argument and her enormous ego. But she was not afraid of me because she did not know who I was. When she did, everything would change. But I did not react immediately. I did not interrupt. I did not argue. I did not step closer. I simply stood still, holding her gaze, letting her bind herself in her own empty excuses. She did not notice. She still thought she was in control. The people in the crowd began to sense something too. Some shook their heads silently, some chuckled, their smiles carrying a secret amusement. They recognized who I was, but they said nothing, didn't intervene. They wanted to see how long it would take Karen to figure it out. I slowly reached into my coat pocket, feeling the cold metal badge nestled in my palm. It wasn't just a badge. It was a symbol of power, of law, of order. Something that HOA Karen thought she could bend to her will. I pulled it out slowly, without rushing, without speaking. The light from the street lamp reflected off the shiny metal. The sheriff's badge. Karen paused. For the first time during the encounter, I saw her falter, if only for a moment. Her eyes fell on the badge, a blink, a pause, and then I saw the color change in her face, from ashen to flushed to utter confusion. I looked at her, and in that moment I saw all the arrogance crumble in her eyes. Gone was the arrogance, the cocked chin, the harsh, authoritative tone of voice from a few minutes ago. There was only confusion growing in her eyes. I said nothing for the first moment. I wanted her to realize it for herself, to feel her own stupidity. I wanted her to soak in every second of the bitter realization of how much of a mistake she had made. But Karen was not the type to accept reality easily. She fought back the panic, tried to put up her wall of pride. I could see the struggles she was having, that she wanted to believe that this was a mistake, that maybe I was just a regular cop, or even that I was a fake trying to intimidate her. But the badge in my hand wasn't fake, and my name was engraved on it. I spoke, my voice low but firm, like a knife cutting through the thick air between us. "This is my car." Karen froze, not because my words were confusing, but because she didn't want to believe it. She looked at the smashed car, then back at me, then back at the car. Her mind was racing, searching for an escape, some way to deny the truth, but there was no escape. There was no way for her to turn the situation around. She had destroyed the sheriff's car, and now she knew that no one could save her from the consequences. I saw her open her mouth, as if to say something, then close it again, because for the first time all evening Karen had nothing to say in her defense. The panic was still in her eyes, but she quickly hid it, trying to regain the air of someone who would never admit she was wrong. She took a deep breath, as if trying to compose herself, then lifted her chin, searching for an escape. I had seen this reaction too many times. The transition from shock to denial to defense, a familiar sequence of reactions from people who had done wrong but didn't want to take responsibility. She couldn't deny what she had done. My car was still there, smashed, marked with the scars of her blind rage. The badge in my hand still glinted in the light, indelible and undeniable. The eyes around her were still watching, one by one, silently but eagerly, waiting to see how she would manage to get out of this situation. And Karen, with her innate stubbornness, chose the only way she knew how, which was to defend herself. Her voice, though it had lost some of its authority, still carried a false calm, a kind of excuse that wasn't very convincing but still managed to force others to believe it. She shrugged, sighed, as if she were still the victim in this story, as if what had just happened was just a small misunderstanding, something not worth making a big deal out of. She said she was just a little angry, that she hadn't meant to vandalize, that she had just wanted to teach a lesson to someone who had parked in the wrong spot, and that if she had known it was the sheriff's car, she wouldn't have done it. Awkward excuse. I looked straight at Karen as she said those words, not interrupting, not reacting immediately. I let her hear them for herself, let her realize the absurdity of each word. A little angry enough to smash a windshield, a little angry enough to dent the hood, a little angry enough to destroy a perfectly legal vehicle just because it was parked somewhere she didn't like. But what really interested me wasn't what she said, but what she didn't say. She didn't apologize, not a word of apology. No sign of genuine remorse, no recognition that her actions were fundamentally wrong. She only regretted that the car belonged to the wrong person. And in her mind, if it had been a normal person's car, someone with no power, no ability to fight back, then it wouldn't have been a problem. HOA Karen's arrogance were not in what she did, but in how she thought she had the right to do it. But the worst part? She still thought she could get away with it. I could see it in her eyes, a hasty calculation, a thought that if she was reasonable, maybe she could still squeeze through this narrow opening. But I wasn't the type to be swayed by a few cheap excuses. There was a heavy silence when HOA Karen finished. She had said what she needed to say. She had tried to make a way out. She had tried to twist the story, but in this moment, with nothing left to defend, she was left with herself. A stubborn and wrong woman, standing in the middle of a battlefield of her own making. And I don't become sheriff by letting people like HOA Karen off the hook. She might think she was used to getting away with it, that a simple excuse, a little feigned remorse would make it all go away. No! There was no mercy here, no hand-waving, no moralizing, no chance for her to get out of it on good terms. Not this time. Not after what she had done. I reached for the radio on my belt and pressed the intercom button. There was a small click, a simple signal that carried the weight of the law. The other end responded quickly, the voice of an officer on duty, short and clear. I called for a patrol car. Karen saw it, and she understood. I recognized the change in her body, if only for a moment, a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, a faster than usual blink, a quick but suppressed breath, as if her entire nervous system had just alerted her that things were no longer under control. But she did nothing, couldn't do anything. Patrol cars are always closer than you think, especially in a small town like this, and when I spoke, when the sheriff directly asked for them, they arrived quickly. In less than 3 minutes, the red and blue lights were flashing at the top of the street. The crowd murmured, many holding up their phones to record the memorable moment. An officer stepped out of the patrol car, his face calm but hard. He looked at me, then at Karen, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage with cold, precise assessment. It was all too clear. Karen took a step back, but she couldn't back away. She didn't struggle, she didn't scream. She knew that wouldn't work on me, on the police, on anyone else here. No one would sympathize with her. No one would side with her. No one would believe she could get away with it. I said nothing more. I didn't have to. The law would do it for me. There was a click as the handcuffs locked around Karen's wrists, a sharp intake of breath, a small movement at the corner of her mouth as if she were about to protest, then swallowed. She stood there motionless like a broken statue. Then, as an officer dragged her toward the patrol car, I saw her bow her head, ever so slightly, like someone who has realized there was nowhere else to go. A police car door opened, the sound of its hinges creaking in the silence. Karen stepped inside, no longer proud, no longer with her chin lifted, no longer with the arrogance of someone who believes she is above others. The car door slammed shut. Karen had officially lost control. The red and green lights spun, reflecting off the dark road. I stood still, watching the patrol car roll away, not feeling any joy. Not feeling any joy, just that this was inevitable. To me, this wasn't a victory. This was just justice. And this time, Karen couldn't manipulate anyone anymore. Share your thoughts. What do you think of Karen's actions? Do people like her always believe they are above the law until they hurt the wrong person? Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar situations? Leave your comments below. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and follow so you don't miss the next stories.